The lights of the New York studio burn with a sharp, artificial glare, casting every detail into crisp visibility: the scuffs on the stage floor, the flecks of dust caught in the beam, the faint reflection of the host's notes in the polished desk surface. The audience is restless, murmurs swelling and dipping like a tide, the low rumble of anticipation amplified by the knowledge that this wasn't just another celebrity interview. Weeks of headlines, viral clips, and heated debates had brought Ibrahim Traoré into this very seat, across from Whoopi Goldberg, on a live broadcast watched across continents. Her smile is wide, polished for the cameras, but her eyes hold a fixed sharpness, the kind that promises pointed questions and no soft landings. She leans forward, shoulders slightly hunched in calculated intimacy, voice dripping with practiced authority, as she begins, "Mr. People say your so-called reforms are dangerous, even divisive. Are you prepared to take responsibility when they fail?" The audience titters, a ripple of excitement at the scent of confrontation. Ibrahim's hands rest calmly on the table, his posture upright yet unaggressive, the faintest tilt of his head making him appear as though he were not the one under fire, but the one assessing. The cameras drink in every fraction of a second of the pause before he speaks, switching between his steady gaze and Whoopi's expectant stare. The studio feels smaller now, as though the air has tightened around them, and the audience begins to lean forward unconsciously. In that weighted silence, he studies her not in defiance, but with the measured patience of someone who has been here before. In rooms where the questions were sharper and the stakes higher, his lips part just enough to let out a sentence, quiet yet heavy, each word paced like a deliberate step. "Failure is not letting the truth be heard." The words hang in the air, defying the host's rhythm, confusing some viewers and intriguing others. A few heads in the crowd turn toward each other, gauging reactions, but most remain fixed on the two figures at the desk. Whoopi tilts her head slightly, one brow lifting, preparing her next move. But something subtle in the room has shifted. Power no longer flows entirely from her side of the table. The audience senses it too, that this will not be a shouting match or a spectacle of interruptions. The lights hum louder in the stillness, the faint buzz filling the gap where applause or rebuttal might have rushed in. A camera pushes for a tight close-up, catching the micro-expression in Whoopi's eyes, a flicker of irritation, or maybe surprise, quickly masked under her professional poise. In the control room, the segment producer leans toward the mic, whispering with urgency, "Stay on him, stay tight," knowing instinctively that this tension is gold for live television. Somewhere in the front row, a faint cough slices through, the air jarring against the concentrated quiet, but the weight of the moment doesn't break. It lingers, suspended like an unresolved note in a song, pulling everything toward something unspoken. A deeper current beneath the conversation that has yet to surface. The kind of undercurrent that audiences feel before they fully understand. And one that promises the next exchange will cut closer than anyone in that room is ready for. The air in the studio remains charged. But Ibrahim's mind drifts with the discipline of someone who knows that every answer is shaped by what came before. The moment between his reply and Whoopi's next question becomes a bridge back through weeks of slow-burn hostility. News clips roll like a silent reel in his head, his name flashing in bold, slanted typeface. Too radical, dangerously unyielding. The African leader picking unnecessary fights with the West. The images bleed into the memory of talking head panels smirking as they reduced his reforms to soundbites of headlines that swapped context for clicks. He recalls an afternoon press conference in Ouagadougou, where a foreign reporter had cut him off mid-sentence, shifting to a more relevant question before his point about resource theft could land. In op-eds, his policies were painted as reckless gambles, stripped of the urgency and history that had birthed them. The system had not simply disagreed with him, it had tried to bury him under a caricature before his truth could breathe. The narration deepens, drawing out hidden layers. A closed-door UN meeting where he'd spoken for 10 minutes about sustainable development, only to watch the room grow still when a white ambassador repeated the exact phrasing minutes later. Suddenly treated as profound, he remembers a visit to a rural village, the air thick with dust and unspoken disappointment, where mothers still waited for the aid promised 5 years prior, while nearby minds fattened foreign accounts. These memories do not swell in him as bitterness, but as a ledger, meticulously kept. Small fragments of dialogue slice through the weight of the images. A young African student, leaning close after a conference, had whispered, "They didn't let you finish, sir. I wish they did." An older diplomat, eyes scanning the corridor to ensure no one overheard, had murmured, "Play along, they'll like you more." Each line, brief but loaded, had etched itself into his memory like an indictment. The world, until now, had chosen not to hear. But then came the rupture, a private gala, where a mining executive extended his hand. Smiling for the cameras, his company's record stained with bribery and land theft. Ibrahim had refused, his eyes holding the man's for a single, unblinking second before turning away. Someone had caught it on video. Within hours, the clip flooded social media, the angles replayed, the act reframed by some as arrogance, by others as courage. The divide was immediate, but so was the momentum. "What?" had once been ignored could no longer be unseen. Invitations poured in from media outlets that had previously written him off, most of them fishing for a soundbite they could twist. Yet one name stood out, not for fairness, but for reach. Whoopi's show was a stage where silence could be louder than applause, where millions would watch and weigh every word. He had agreed, not for spectacle, but because the moment demanded a setting where the questions were meant to corner him, and the answers could not be edited in the shadows. Now, as the scene cuts between the studio's bright stage and the dim corridors of these memories, the tension builds without a single raised voice. The contrast sharpening the sense that the conversation ahead is not merely between host and guest, it is between two worlds, colliding under the scrutiny of the lights. Back in the present, the lights feel hotter, the air denser, as if the studio itself is leaning closer to the desk. Whoopi's smile tightens at the edges, and she leans in again, her tone losing the casual pretense it carried before. "You talk about justice," she says, each word shaped with deliberate weight, "but some call your actions confrontational. Isn't unity about compromise?" A low murmur rolls through the audience, a ripple of approval for the question's sharpness. Ibrahim's posture doesn't change. There's no defensive shift, no tightening of his jaw. Instead, a slow, measured breath leaves him, his eyes locked on hers, not with hostility, but with the calm regard of someone who sees the question for what it is, a mirror of a larger misunderstanding. "Compromise," he begins, his voice quiet but carrying to the farthest seat. "When it means silencing the oppressed, is not unity, it is surrender." The words cut through the space between them, leaving the audience suspended in a stillness that feels heavier than sound. Somewhere in the crowd, a pen clicks nervously, the tiny noise amplified in the hush. The camera shifts to Whoopi's face, catching the split-second flicker of surprise before her practiced control returns. She pivots quickly, her voice a little more pointed now, pressing into well-worn criticisms, allegations of corruption in his circle, his rejection of certain foreign aid packages, the image problem that Western media clings to. Each question is delivered like a strike meant to rattle him. But Ibrahim's replies come without the heat she might have anticipated. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't rush to defend himself. Instead, his words land with the steady weight of stone, his restraint making each answer feel more final than rebuttal. The narration lingers on the scene's subtle poetry, how his stillness under the lights becomes a kind of force, how the quiet composure on his shoulder speaks louder than the scattered applause that tries to fill the space. The cameras, as if aware of this shift, hold longer on his face, lingering on the way his eyes remain steady, on the way his pauses seem to draw the air toward him. Whoopi tries one last push, her tone sharpened to a challenge that hangs like a blade over the desk. "So tell me, Mr. Traore, if you had the entire world's ear for just 1 minute, what would you say?" The words freeze the room. Even the sound crew in the shadows stills, their hands poised over dials and switches, afraid to break the moment. Ibrahim doesn't answer immediately. He lets the silence breathe, lets the weight of the question settle where it belongs, not in him, but in those who will hear the answer. When it comes, it isn't wrapped in rhetoric, or delivered like a performance. It is offered as though carved in stone. "I would tell them, the wealth of one child's future is worth more than all your gold." The sentence feels like a bell, struck in slow motion, its resonance sinking deeper than volume could reach. No one moves. The audience doesn't erupt into applause. They simply stay still, as if moving too soon would scatter something fragile in the air. Whoopi's hand, resting on the desk, curls inward slightly, fingertips pressing into the wood, her expression caught between reflection and resistance. The silence stretches not because there's nothing left to say, but because there's nothing left to defend, and in that suspended quiet, it becomes clear that the moment has outgrown the stage, spilling into something larger than the interview itself. The broadcast ends, the studio lights dimming to a softer glow as crew members unclip mics and the audience begins its slow shuffle toward the exits. But the weight of what has just been said lingers in the air like the scent of rain after a storm. That final exchange, one question, one answer, slips from the confines of the stage within minutes. By the time Ibrahim reaches the car waiting to take him to his hotel, his phone is already buzzing with notifications. The clip flooding social media feeds, not for its drama, but for the way the room had gone utterly still. Comment threads grow into quiet debates, some defending him with conviction, others begrudgingly admitting that the moment made them think. News networks replay the scene on loop, often without commentary, letting the silence speak for itself. In the following weeks, coverage begins to shift in tone. Commentators who once dismissed him as naive or radical now find themselves quoting him, sometimes carefully, as if wary of being accused of hypocrisy. Old interviews resurface, their messages once easy to ignore, now studied for the consistency of his stance. Whoopi herself offers no direct remark on the exchange, but subtle changes ripple through her show. In the next few episodes, activist guests are met with a gentler pace, questions framed with more space for answers, as if some part of that night had left an impression she could not entirely brush aside. Back home, Ibrahim's public reception transforms in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. In the markets, people pause in mid-transaction to give a nod or a brief smile. In the streets, strangers meet his gaze and place a hand over their heart in silent acknowledgement. No grand speeches, no public declarations, just an undercurrent of respect that moves like a current beneath the surface of daily life. The collapse of those who opposed him is not loud or dramatic. It's subtler, harder to headline. Certain political commentators stop inviting him onto panels designed for ridicule, the easy target he once provided no longer fitting the narrative they wish to sell. Foreign executives begin refusing photo ops with him, unwilling to risk association that might imply concession. Even the language changes. The same media outlets that once called him controversial now pivot to uncompromising. The label delivered with a grudging respect. One night, alone in a hotel room with only the faint hum of the city outside, Ibrahim scrolls through clips of the interview. His finger hovers over the replay button, but he always stops at the same frame the second after his final answer. When the camera caught Whoopi's eyes, they are not eyes of defeat, but of someone searching, recalibrating, perhaps seeing a truth that cannot be easily unlearned. He wonders if that seed will grow, if in the quiet of her own thoughts, the question will turn inward. The narration pulls back, past the solitary figure in the hotel room, past the glow of the city's skyline, past the airwaves still carrying his words across time zones. Change, it reminds us, does not always roar into existence. Sometimes it begins in the fragile stillness after the right words are spoken. In the breathless pause, when no one, not even the ones with the sharpest questions, knows quite what to say.